Ndere ndere muwala wange ndere gwe wangamba ndere. Ndere ndere muwala wange ndere gwe wangamba ndere. Tisekati kano ndere sikalungi kalwadde ndere kabeera muntu ndere kekali ntutte ndere. Ndere ndere muwala wange ndere gwe wangamba ndere. Ndere ndere muwala wange ndere gwe wangamba ndere. Tisekati kano ndere sikalungi kalwadde ndere kabeera muntu ndere kekali ntutte ndere. Ndere ndere muwala wange ndere gwe wangamba 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 ndere. Thank you. I am Samite. I am a musician. I am a refugee. And I have a profound interest in how music heals people from pain and trauma. First, let me tell you how I became a refugee. Growing up in Uganda, I spent most of my time with my grandparents. The head of that house was my grandfather. We called him Jaja. He was a relative of the king and a wealthy man, but who was also very humble. He gave up all his wealth to his wife so he could spend his life spreading Christianity to people in East Africa. He could have afforded any pair of shoes, but he chose to wear wooden shoes that peasants wore. When I was a little boy, he'd hold me by the hand, very tight, and lead me to the forest to talk. As we walked, his wooden shoes would crush the fallen leaves. Kucho, 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 kucho. And in the forest, he'd share his wisdom with me. He taught me not to pay attention to material things, that they were ultimately meaningless. One day, my birthday was coming up, and I asked him, Jaja, do you have big plans for me? Are we going to have a big party? No, he said. Those are the material things you should avoid. I was very disappointed. I was hoping I was going to get my Batman suit. Next to our house was a big forest. In the mornings, you'd hear sounds coming out of this forest. Sounds of birds, sounds of monkeys and other animals. I remember a big bird called the crested crane. He'd land in the opening behind the house. And we would get very excited and sing a song for him. Ngali sabasaliza, ngali sabasaliza bana mweyogerere. Ngali sabasaliza, ngali sabasaliza bana mweyogerere. He'd spread his wings really wide and give us a dance. That's what we thought until we saw a female crested crane landing there. And we knew that dance wasn't for us. In the evenings, you'd hear sounds of drums, sounds of music coming in from the hills around us. Life was perfect. Until a dictator called Idi Amin Dada came to power. You know that guy? Mm-hmm. Idi Amin and his henchmen became paranoid. They started kidnapping people, torturing them for information. People started to die. The birds stopped singing. The music stopped. In the beginning, we thought the kidnapping and the torture happened to other families. But soon, that senseless killing touched all of us. In my own family, my big brother Richard Mulondo was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. My stepdad, Dr. Paul Wamala, was kidnapped, tortured, and killed. Death became the new normal. In 1982, I had to escape. I became a refugee in Kenya, in a place called Thika. That's where the refugee camp was. Staying in a refugee camp taught me a different way of looking at life. It didn't matter whether you were a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a teacher. We were all just refugees trying to survive. In fact, the king of the camp was a man whose name was Sunday. He used to be a street beggar. First, let me tell you about this refugee camp. It was way out there in a desolate place with a very high fence around it. There was always a great fear that people could be poisoned by the governments of the countries they fled from. So the cook always ate first before anyone dared to take a bite. And we took turns to cook. There was no real entertainment for us other than one black and white television that was in the center of the camp. That's where we went to see our favorite TV show called Dallas. We called it JR. And because they recycled through 4 episodes, most people knew what was coming next. So they would tell the newcomers what JR was about to say and do next. And the newcomers would say, "Shut up, let me see for myself." The real entertainment would start after the guards would come and interrupt our JR show. They would send us back into the dormitories and come and do a head count and then lock us in. That's when we'd all jump off our bunk beds and sit around Sunday's bed. Sunday was a naturally gifted storyteller. As a little boy, he contracted polio, so he couldn't walk the many miles to school. When he grew up, he became a street beggar. And from his perspective on the ground, he watched and saw how the conmen and thieves worked. So he had so many stories to tell us. We especially loved this one story that we turned into a game that we played on the newcomers. Because we didn't have money, we'd take beans and put them in the newcomer's pocket. And then Sunday would come and slap them on the face. Steal the beans. The surprised look on the newcomer's face sent us to our bed smiling and laughing. Sunday transported us out of that refugee camp with his storytelling. I would watch to see how long it would take the bank manager, the lawyer, the engineer to realize that it was Sunday they needed to befriend, to be respected in that refugee camp. This reaffirmed to me the way my grandfather saw life. The inherent equality of all human beings. After I left the refugee camp, I was allowed to work in Nairobi, but I didn't feel safe in Kenya. So in 1987, I migrated to the US. And a few years later, I was established as a musician in the US. And one day, at the end of a concert I was doing upstate New York, I was approached by a former Peace Corps volunteer to join him to do humanitarian work in Africa. Mind you, this was at the time when there was ethnic cleansing going on in Rwanda, massacres going on in Liberia. But I just said, yes, I want to go. What I really wanted to say was, no way. I don't want to go back to Africa. But I wasn't too concerned. This guy didn't look like he could really put together a trip. But a few, 3 months later, he'd convinced PBS to air a documentary called The Song of the Refugee that we were going to shoot in Africa. I found myself on the plane to Liberia. After we landed, we headed towards an IDP camp, internally displaced persons camp. There, the children looked so lost, so sad. They'd seen so much suffering, so much death, that they had become numb. Flies went in and around their eyes, and they didn't even blink. I soon found out that by playing my flute and kalimba, the children would start to sing again. They would tell me they had their own song to share. The mothers would hear the children singing and laughing. The mothers would come, join us, taking over the whole show with their own songs. Slowly, even the men joined in. And this happened everywhere we went. But it was especially powerful in Rwanda, where the ethnic cleansing had taken so many lives. There I met a 6-year-old boy who after hearing my flute, he told me his family and all his friends had been killed. But he soon took off to bring me the new friend he had just met at the camp. He wanted his new friend to hear my flute, so I played for him too. Soon I had about 30 kids around me playing buckets as drums and singing. That's when I knew I needed to do something to make it possible for me and other musicians to share our music in places where people needed the healing power of music. So I created an organization called Musicians for World Harmony. A few years later in the US, I was now fully committed to explore the healing power of music with Musicians for World Harmony. I asked my agent that wherever he booked concerts for me, if he would also organize for me to share my music with children and adults in hospitals, children with cancer, adults with cancer. The first one he organized for me was somewhere in Grand Rapids. It was in a big round building. And the sound in this building was tuku, 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 tuku. And there was a long hallway going around this building, and off the hallway were, cubicles. And in each cubicle, there were recliners. That's where people sat as they received their chemo. So I walked around and around looking for who I was going to connect with until I saw him. He was a tall man with a mean face. I knocked on the door and introduced myself. He couldn't believe I was talking to him. His shoulders were so high and his face was so stiff. I said, "Hi, can I play some music?" He just shrugged his shoulders. So I just pulled out my flute, started playing for him. Immediately, I noticed his face becoming softer. The longer I played, the kinder he looked. Then I switched to the kalimba, and I noticed that he was almost tapping his foot. When I was done, he leaned forward and he said, "What the hell is that you're wearing around your neck?" So I knew he was ready to talk. So I told him about the Udabi, the nomads of Niger. I said, "These guys, it's the men that do the makeup. They have jewelry all over their bodies and they do colors. And then the women come and choose the guy who has the best makeup and they marry him." He leaned forward, he says, "I'll be dumb. Tell me more about those people." So I did, and also told him about my family. He relaxed and opened up. He pointed at the needle in his arm. He said, "You see this? This isn't the first time I'm doing this. The first time the chemo didn't work. If it doesn't work, I'm going to die. I'm so worried about my wife. How is she going to manage the farm? We have big tractors. I said, I hope it works, my friend. We talked more and shared our pain. He realized we had a lot in common. We had the same sense of humor. We laughed at the same things. I know this was the first time this man had met someone like me from Africa. When his wife returned, he said, honey, come quickly. I want you to meet my best friend. He's my new friend. He's from Uganda. He's from Africa. His name is Samite. This man had learned to let go of judgment of me. He'd learned to look at what we had in common. This reaffirmed to me one of my grandfather's lessons, that we must let go of judgment of others and throw away fear in order to live peacefully. And we must let go of judgment of others in order to live peacefully, but we must look at the commonality between us in order to live as people together. In my own life in the US, I was faced with extreme challenges. When my wife Joanne, who I had been with for over 20 years, 2 days after Christmas could not pronounce my name. When she tried, all she could make was the S sound. I took her to the doctor, and there they told her she had a tumor the size of a golf ball in her head. And it was incurable. But we still had music. Joanne fought this disease for about a year and 22 days. She loved to sing. But after the first operation, she couldn't sing anymore. So when we go to her, sing to her, she would move her lips to go along with the song. I thought this was going to be an extremely difficult and challenging experience. But strangely, it turned out to be beautiful. My life became easy. My body, mind, and spirit became very strong. When I'd go in the studio to record, music would just flow into my head. People would ask me, how are you doing? I would say, I'm doing just fine. I was truly doing fine. I believe it was because I wasn't focused on myself. Quietly, Joanne's doctor told us that she was going to die, but we should not let her know. She came to me 2 days after that. She said, why do I have this strange feeling? You've been told I was going to die. So I just lied to her, you're not going to die. But then 4 weeks after that, she found out that yes, we had been told she was going to die, that her best friend, me, had lied to her. She said, I want to talk to you. I was trembling inside. She said, sit right next to me. Promise me one thing, she said. Promise me that you won't, after I've gone, you won't marry the first woman who walks into your life. Joanne was not thinking about herself. Life is easier when we take focus off of ourselves. I waited a little bit, but actually I messed up. I found all kinds of, dated with the wrong people until I eventually found the right person. In fact, right now we have Joanne's pictures in our house, even in a place where I write music. Music heals. Semsajja agenda kaleeba tindabira bali ekeeyo kaleeba kyekinyonyi kiri ku luzzi kaleeba kyambadde ensimbi kaleeba ensimbi n'obutiiti kaleeba musajja agenda aleeba kindabira balyekeeyo aleeba tekinyonyi kiri ku luzzi aleeba tikyambadde ensimbi aleeba ensimbi n'obutiiti aleeba tikyokyoki aleeba ticyancakala koko cyancakala ticyancakala koko cyancakala ticyancakala koko cyancakala ticyancakala koko cyancakala. Thank you. Thank you.